Welcome everyone to this special Labor Academy event conducted in partnership with Lean Victoria and the Urban Planning Policy Committee of Victorian Labor. Tonight, our acknowledgement of the traditional owners and custodians of the land from which we're all connecting in this webinar is more poignant than usual. We honour their elders, past, present and emerging, and we also seek, especially in this event, to make amends for the catastrophic damage settler colonialism has inflicted on Aboriginal people, on their lands, and on the complex web of life on which we are all part. Aboriginal law teaches us how to live well with each other and with the land and its creatures, our duties and responsibilities to each other and to everything in the natural world. That means weaving nature into the very fabric of even our most urban lives. And further to that means weaving this Victorian Labor policy into the platform for the next election. Now, this webinar, as I said, is hosted by Lean, the Labor Environment Action Network, represented tonight here by Nick Withers, co-convener of Lean Victoria, a member of the Eltham branch, and an associate member of UPAC, the Urban Planning Policy Committee. And UPAC is represented here by Emeritus Professor Tony Dalton, who taught urban planning at RMIT for decades. He will join the Q&A after you've had your questions, put your questions into the chat. The Policy Committee is, finally, we have two specialist guests. Professor John Thwaites, former Deputy Premier and now Chair of the Monash Sustainable Development Institute and Climateworks Centre. And last but not least at all, but Professor Sarah BEKESSY from RMIT, who leads the ICON Science Research Group, which uses interdisciplinary approaches to solve complex biodiversity conservation problems. It's my pleasure to hand the evening over to Nick Withers.
Well, good evening, everybody, and I am absolutely delighted to see, well, I can't see you, but I'm absolutely delighted to know that you're there. What I'd like to do is very briefly provide a little bit of context for the remarks that you're going to hear from John and from Sarah. Lean Victoria has been campaigning since last year's state conference about revitalising Victoria's environment and the livability of our urban areas, both in cities and in towns everywhere in Victoria. And as a result of all the discussions and communications that we had throughout last year, we came to focus our campaign on the livability aspect in order to build support within Labor for there to be a change of policy and platform commitments. What we're seeing is both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge is that various state of the environment reports and parliamentary inquiries have made it very clear that our environment and biodiversity are degrading. And we've came to the conclusion this is a testament, not a good testament, but a testament to defects in the Planning and Environment Act, saying that it's not working. Not working because that doesn't provide mechanisms to get outcomes that build and restore the biodiversity of our environment. In fact, it presides over a regime of death by 1,000 cuts. So as a result, our cities and towns have become more susceptible to the impacts of climate change and are becoming less livable. Already, urban infrastructure in cities and towns across Victoria are not coping with extreme weather events. Moreover, people are concerned that more housing development means less livability for them, and they fear the amenity of where they live will disappear or become degraded through overuse. Lean Victoria's perspective, and now the party's perspective, because of the adoption of the Urban Affairs Policy Committee's policy recommendations, is that nature can be a key ally for addressing these land use planning and management challenges. The case for regenerating and reconnecting nature in cities is clear-cut. Plan Victoria's bold vision for more homes and more densely populated urban areas presents challenges to gain community acceptance and enthusiasm. And the solution is the title of our forum tonight, Weaving Nature into the Fabric of Urban Life by Design. We see this as a vital imperative for a better and more sustainable future. And now our party policy has the vision to create greener, more livable, more sustainable neighbourhoods for all Victorians, and to create a Labour legacy with durable, nature-positive corridors, not by accident, but by design. The next step is for the Allan Labor government to seize the opportunity and seriously embrace nature as a fundamental pillar of the Plan for Victoria's plan for addressing the inescapable growth of our cities and towns. So weaving nature into the fabric of urban life by design, we see will help timely implementation of the plan for Victoria in ways that benefit urban livability, community resilience, action on housing, outdoor recreation and public health, biodiversity, and community connections with nature. And we also think that the credible commitment to this solution in the platform will be electorally positive. Can I have the next slide, please? So we see that this will involve 3 steps. The first step, a government commitment and determination to do it. A second step, development of a nature-positive strategy for delivering the outcomes. And then the third step, a rolling program of well-planned and executed nature-positive actions with monitoring and reporting on progress. So this requires whole of government actions to be coordinated and well planned. We need 21st century planning and regulatory mechanisms put into a Reform Planning and Environment Act. Needs to be backed by the means to get it done, harnessing community, government and private sector resources and investment, and achieving specific and measurable nature positive targets. So this forum builds on Lean Victoria's campaign and the Urban Affairs Policy Committee's work. Our campaign throughout last year and this year leading up to the conference was being positively received. We've reached out and engaged widely within the party, receiving encouragement from all quarters, and our work in this continues. The Urban Affairs Policy Committee's policy recommendations are now party policies. So the next steps after this forum are to convert those policies into platform commitments. And I'm hoping that from this evening, people will feel encouraged to advocate for that. So now it's my very, very great pleasure to hand over to John Thwaites. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Nick, and it's great to be part of this lean discussion. I'm going to start by talking about some of the politics of urban planning and nature, and then Sarah BEKESSY is going to follow up and really use her expertise in biodiversity and urban planning to indicate how we might achieve that. So I think the starting point is for us to think, what sort of cities do we want to live in? And I think we know we want to live in cities where housing is available and affordable, where jobs and services are reasonably close to where we live, cities that are safe and healthy, importantly, cities that have a sense of culture and connectedness, and importantly, cities that are in a good environment where nature thrives, and as humans, we can thrive with nature. And I think it's that combination of things that makes for good urban planning. And that's true whether we live in Melbourne, which is a fantastic livable city, or whether we live in Geelong or Ballarat or Bendigo or any of the other great regional towns that we have around the state. Now, there is currently a debate about housing. It's part of the big political debate. And through that debate, we're seeing some industry groups and some politicians argue that we have to sacrifice the environment and sustainability in order to get housing and housing affordability. And we really saw that during the productivity roundtable, which Jim Chalmers had in Canberra, when the Housing Industry Association and the master builders argued that we essentially should drop the sustainability provisions in the National Construction Code and hold them back. And that became part of the narrative around housing. And I've heard politicians say that we can't afford sustainability now. And in my considered view, that is just bullshit. That's the professional term that I would use. These groups have been opposing sustainability in housing from the start. Like back from the time I was minister and for the first time introduced 5-star energy efficiency in housing, it was opposed by the industry groups, and it was said that it was going to cause delays and more expense. And in fact, we have shown you can deliver that without delay and without substantial extra expense. And the core message, I would say, is that we don't have to trade off the environment for housing. We can and should have both. And I would argue that nature is worth preserving for its own value. But even beyond that, nature provides so many services for us as humans. And if you just think about it, as you look outside, and I'm looking outside of my place now, the trees we have. I mean, in an urban environment that is warming through climate change and where we have the urban heat island effect, trees actually can reduce the temperature in a street by between 2 and 7 degrees. And you think of waterways and the way that wetlands, for example, can deal with flood mitigation, which also is going to be an increasing issue with climate change, more sudden storms. And birds, I think birds give us a sense. It's probably for people living in the city, it's the sort of the closest connection we get with nature. And I know for myself, I rather like magpies. They do seem to have I may anthropomorphize this, but they do seem to have a sort of human characteristics and a personality. And I enjoy having them around, and I think other people enjoy the other wildlife that we can have in the city. And of course, nature basically helps our health, our physical health, but also our mental health. And there's lots of pretty good evidence to back that up, that it actually has a beneficial impact on our health. So if we think that's what our city should be, and I'm saying we don't need to trade off the environment and housing. But as we discuss urban planning, I think we should focus on what people want. And we are a democracy, and I think urban planning should be democratic. But I want to really emphasize that does not mean NIMBYism. Because often what is said is that, oh, well, the environmental people, they don't want anything, they don't want any development, and that's NIMBYism. But I think what Sarah's going to talk about, and what I've seen, is that you can have really good developments, you can have medium density developments and protect nature at the same time. And so, let's do that, and let's look at the smart ways of doing that and not sacrifice what people want. The other thing, if you want to know what people want, a pretty good thing to do is to ask them. And we've got some pretty good data. And Sarah and I have both been involved in the Biodiversity Council, which is essentially a way to bring scientists who have expertise, not just in biodiversity, but across the social sciences also, to bring that expertise together and to communicate to the public about the importance of biodiversity. And the Biodiversity Council has conducted a survey of what people think about nature. And this was conducted late last year with 3,559 Australians. And it was led by BehaviourWorks Australia, which is part of Monash Sustainable Development Institute, which I chair. But it also included a number of other experts like Sarah as co-authors on their report. And I think it's quite fascinating because what it reveals is in fact there's a growing concern among Australians about the state of nature in Australia. And the findings in that report reveal that Australians recognise there are key threats to nature, and they believe the government should take stronger action to protect nature. And if you just look at the numbers in the survey, 88% of Australians stated that it is important to them to know that nature is being looked after. 88%. And that's an increase from the previous survey in 2022 when it was 83%. The survey said that Australians also highlight that they enjoy spending time in nature, 86% of people, and value its role in helping manage everyday stress, 79% of people. So these aren't just sort of theoretical concepts in academic papers. These are actually what people are saying when they're asked what they want. And one of the most interesting things I thought in the report was that people are concerned about nature in the places where they live.
Mm.
And 86% of Australians express concern about the loss of plants and animals in their local area. So I think this survey does really reflect what is a widespread public awareness, not only of the importance of nature, but the potential for degradation of nature in their local suburb. And specifically, 83% said they were concerned about the impact on biodiversity of land clearing for urban development, of which 30% were extremely concerned. And interestingly, that level of concern is even higher than the level of concern about native logging or about land clearing for agriculture. I mean, both of those are important, but sometimes you see the debate is just about agriculture or native timber logging. Actually, when you ask people, they focus on their local area. And if we're looking at the politics of this, who are the group that were most concerned? Younger people, aged 18 to 44. 44 is not that young, but it seems young to me. But the survey indicated high levels of concern in that group, but also amongst swinging voters. So if we in the Labor Party are designing our policies for the next state election, one of the first things that we need to do is go to the evidence about what people are thinking and saying. The survey also, I think, it highlighted that a lot of people are engaged with nature, and probably the way they do that most is simply by spending time in nature. And you can't do that if your city or town knocks it out. And we don't want to live in concrete jungles. It's quite clear. We want to live in an environment where we can feel nature, where we can be part of the trees, see the birds, feel we're part of that. And I think the final thing I'd like to highlight in terms of that survey is the politics of it. And the survey indicated strong support for pro-biodiversity policies. So 75% of people supported strengthening environmental laws to protect nature, and 72% supported protecting native species habitat from development, including urban expansion. So it's spot on the topic that we're talking about today. So I think if we are planning our election policies, we have an opportunity here to meet what people are saying, which is that they want to protect nature, but importantly, they want to live in cities and suburbs where they can enjoy nature themselves. The final thing I want to talk about before handing over to Sarah is an area that I've had a long connection with, which is water. And I was Minister for Water during the drought, a period when we saw, really quite a devastating impact on our parks and gardens in the cities. And I think one of the things that we learnt there was that we couldn't afford to do that again, which is one of the reasons I supported a desalination plant, despite the fact that a lot of people didn't support that. But actually having alternative sources of supply in a drought is really important. But there's another aspect of water which is really important for biodiversity, and that is stormwater. And with climate change, we are going to get more extreme summer and particularly summer storms. Now, in nature, what happens with stormwater is that it seeps into the soil and then it's transpired through vegetation out into the atmosphere, a large part of that water. Whereas what we have traditionally done in cities is channel all that water into stormwater drains, which then gets pumped into our creeks and rivers. And that gouges out the sides of the creeks and the rivers and destroys habitat. And it's the single biggest threat to our waterways and the biodiversity around our waterways, like platypus, for example. And that is the way we do stormwater. And this is going to be a huge challenge in our fast-growing suburbs in the north and the west and the southeast. You know, we could lose platypus from those areas. We can destroy the health of those creeks. And I think the good news is that there is something we can do about this. And this is something since leaving politics, I've worked on a lot as chair of Melbourne Water and at Monash in the CRC for water sensitive cities. And that is water sensitive urban design. And we can actually design our new development so that it manages stormwater to try to keep it in the environment and not have it just go into drains and destroy the environment. And when I was chair of Melbourne Water, we really had a focus on this. For example, turning Moonee Ponds Creek, you know, the aim from what was a concrete channel back into a creek, or Dandenong Creek and Stony Creek, these various creeks that traditionally were stormwater drains, we're actually turning into natural spaces, planting trees and wetlands, and that's bringing back the habitat. And that water sensitive urban design is now embedded in the planning scheme, and we actually got changes to the planning scheme to do that. But what I know Sarah's going to talk about is biosensitive urban design. And I'm really looking forward to that because, as she said to me, what we need to do is merge water sensitive urban design and biosensitive urban design and embed them both in the planning scheme. So with that, I'm really pleased to hand over to Sarah and hear from you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, John. I'm going to try. Oh, hang on. Can I share my slides? Maybe not. Can someone share my slides? Sorry, I don't think I've got the authority to do so. Here we go. Hoping that everyone can see that. Great.
Yes, we can, Sarah.
Thank you. Well, it's always a challenge to come after a a sort of extraordinary spokesperson like John, who I think perhaps for the first time articulated the findings of that survey in a way that I really hadn't heard before. So thank you, John. That was really informative and fantastic. I also wanted to thank Janet and Nick for being such exceptional kind of advocates in this space, and Tony, who I worked with for many years at RMIT. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here to talk about the work that I've been doing probably for the last sort of 15, 20 years, to think about how we do this very thing of weaving nature into the fabric of urban life. I would like to start also by acknowledging that we're sitting here on the land, I'm here on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my deepest respects to elders past and present. And also to acknowledge that this space, as Janet mentioned, is a super critical opportunity. With treaty, with the First Peoples Assembly, this is a way of actually bringing respect for country, bringing traditional knowledge, bringing significant species into the everyday lives of people in cities, which most of us live in cities now, of course, and to involve First Nations people in the design, the implementation, the governance of urban nature. I think it's a really critical opportunity that we can't miss. And I'm going to weave that through this presentation, hopefully. But I just wanted to start by, pointing out the challenges, which I think John also very poignantly did. But, we are living in a time of unprecedented challenges in cities, of extreme weather, of exponential population growth, pandemics, just simply keeping people healthy, happy, connected with each other, connected with nature is a profound urban planning challenge. And we're all scrambling, really, to find solutions. But what has been fascinating to me is that now green is almost always on the table when it comes to thinking about solutions. Using urban forests to cool cities, to slow water down, to solve kind of challenges. On the left here, just out of interest, is a project that we implemented in the city of Valladolid in Spain, which are these sort of biodiverse shade sails, which cool the city really dramatically in the summer and allow it to be a tourist destination, even in the middle of the summer. And it's also like a real Instagram kind of hotspot, apparently. So why are we seeking, why are we kind of seeing green as big part of the solution? And that's, really because there are now well-evidenced benefits that John pointed out. I'll just reiterate. The idea that our health and well-being deeply depends on nature. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We can cool our city really dramatically and slow down storm events. We can allow threatened species to thrive and survive. This next one, the magpie example is just one. But the idea that we can re-enchant people with the very idea of nature in cities, our children, our people who are desperate to have connection with nature can achieve it if we provide those opportunities. And then that really important idea of connecting with Indigenous history and culture. I will add that, I work a lot with developers, and, what they see as the advantages to this, of course, are the financial benefits, and there are many. The evidence is rolling in, but, we know that CBD buildings with rooftop gardens and CBD courtyards with biodiversity, street plantings have higher occupancy rates and longer term occupancy rates. That's really significant. Retail strips with more biodiversity and vegetation, as we have now measured in Mallopp Street in Geelong, have more foot traffic, so more people buying stuff, which apparently is a good thing. So we know that this idea of the health and well-being of our population, being intricately linked to how much nature exposure we have and how much opportunity we have to engage in nature. To me, this is probably a compelling enough reason to do this without any of the other benefits that I've mentioned. The idea that if you're lucky enough to live in a street with more biodiversity, not just green, with more biodiversity, you're less likely to die from, heart disease and cancer. You'll sleep better at night, have lower risk of mental health issues. Your kids, if they play in a playground with more biodiversity, will have improved cognitive functioning and lower rates of behavioural issues. It's a total no-brainer to me that this is a kind of solution to some of the kind of core issues like loneliness, like lack of community. Nature can really help us provide in all of these contexts. But further to that, I feel like this is a probably less sort of explored area, but I think the idea that we can create sense of place. You step out of an aeroplane and you smell the vegetation, you hear the birds, and you're in Melbourne. You step into your streetscape and it couldn't just be Hong Kong or London, it's actually Melbourne, because you see the vegetation and you hear the bird life. And that's actually something that planners and designers really seek to create, that sense of place. We can do it with biodiversity. And coming back to my earlier point, this notion that we can bring back culturally significant species to Melbourne. I don't know why that skipped, sorry. This is a really unfortunately named butterfly called the common brown butterfly. It's actually really exciting and not common. It's actually in fact disappeared mostly from Melbourne. Once used to emerge at the start of one of the 7 Wurundjeri seasons in massive numbers in Melbourne. You couldn't escape them. And, we're working with the City of Melbourne to try and do that again for Melbourne, to try and bring this butterfly back through actions that we can all do in our front yards, backyards and streetscapes. And it's possible. And this could, be a way of actually really connecting people again with the idea of the 7 Wurundjeri seasons and this really culturally significant species. But of course, it's possible to fill a city with trees and have not much biodiversity benefit. And, this is an example here of probably my least favorite tree, the ornamental pear. Nick, I don't know if you share this kind of detest for the ornamental pear, but it's a
Oh, I
tree
can
that
see it. Yeah.
is so often planted, so often planted in new urban developments, and it provides shade. Well, that's one of the benefits, but really nothing else. In fact, it's a biological desert, and indeed, it's kind of poisonous to local fauna. So it's a tree that is really under performing when it comes to delivering on those benefits. So that's a pity for people, obviously, because you're missing out on those health and well-being benefits and all of the multitude of other benefits I described. But of course, it's also a pity because we know that cities are really critical places for biodiversity. They're biodiversity hotspots. And this is a kind of a weird thing that probably a lot of people don't recognize, but there are more threatened species in and around our cities than there are in their rural counterparts, including these 39 species here that are threatened and only exist in cities. So, in some ways, we've got a really critical responsibility in cities to actually protect our local biodiversity. And I'm putting up here probably my favorite ecosystem. And there aren't many people who share this kind of passion, but this is the basalt plains grasslands of Melbourne, of which there's less than 1% left. And it is probably Australia's most critically endangered ecosystem. And we are building our houses on top of it, and we continue to do so. There are really critically endangered species here that exist nowhere else in the world. In fact, we rediscovered one only a year ago. I don't know if anyone saw this in the news, but the grassland earless dragon. This tiny little thing, it lives in spider burrows in the grasslands, and it's incredibly cute and so rare that we thought it was extinct since the 1960s. And we rediscovered it in Melbourne. And I remember the day that actually someone from the Age rang me and said, Dr. BEKESSY, what do you think of this rediscovery of these species? And I was just, I was kind of like breathless and beside myself and so excited. And what an opportunity to bring something, back from the edge of extinction. And I opened the newspaper next day just expecting to see rare dragon discovered in Melbourne's backyard, or the headline that, opportunity to kind of, sort of brings a species back from the edge of extinction. Do you know what the headline was? Lizard
Ah,
threatens
ah,
housing. And to me, that was just such a depressing moment. But I thought, gee, we've got a lot of work to do here. Just to bring people on this journey with how beautiful and enchanting our biodiversity is, and how, sort of really terrible housing is not worth the demise of a species like that. I don't mean to be negative. I'm a pretty optimistic person, to be honest, but actually, we have to reflect on the fact that Australia's got a really serious problem when it comes to biodiversity extinction. We are, a mega diverse country. We're a developed country. So good. We should be doing better than anyone in terms of actually preserving what we've got. Most of our biodiversity is found nowhere else on the planet. And yet we're actually leading the world in biodiversity extinction. We've got more than 2,000 species now threatened with extinction. 19 ecosystems showing clear sign of collapse, including, the Great Barrier Reef and our alpine systems. Once very common species like koalas, gang cockatoos, bogong moths, which once used to plaster the windows of Parliament House in Canberra. Actually, talking to the Canberran politicians, that was a really kind of profound moment for some of them when I talked about that. And they reflect on the fact they hadn't seen bogong moths, in the last couple of years. And I think it was actually quite a profound moment for them. We need to do better. And one of the places we really need to do better is our cities. This type of housing, people are sold a kind of a dream of living in nature. You see the billboards of women and kids running around in the meadows and catching butterflies. It's literally what the advertising material is, and then this is what you move into. No eaves, one house in front of the one tree in front of the house, and probably on top of a critically endangered ecosystem. So one of the things we've been doing, the Biodiversity Council, is trying to, that first thing of actually reversing this trend of actually using our threatened species habitat to grow our homes. It's not necessary. I'm going to show you why in a second. This is a pledge that we're putting out to developers, to consultants, to designers, and really importantly to investors to try and get this idea that we need to clear threatened species habitat to grow our cities put to bed. This, of course, is also not the solution. This is a real photo of Melbourne, and this is not how you allow people to connect with nature. And likewise, a lot of the kind of middle ring, this is kind of, I suppose, mid-rise, which I would definitely promote. But it's not the solution to connecting people with nature. I look at this and I think, where is one tree in this development? We need an alternative approach, and that's really what has driven us to develop this idea of biodiversity sensitive urban design. This notion that we can actually allow biodiversity to thrive at the same time as doing housing development, bring back species, ecosystems, and biodiversity values and the services that they deliver to us through really careful, intentional, scientifically driven design. The really interesting thing is that the multiple studies now have shown that actually there is enough space to be doing this kind of sustainable mid-rise in Melbourne. And if we do it in the right way so that it does, it's enchanting like this, then people are much less likely, I think, to oppose it. The idea that we can do it in a way that's also affordable and sustainable is something I'm going to come to in a second. But let me just quickly tell you about the idea of biodiversity sensitive urban design. It's pretty sensible, I suppose, and not something it's not sort of necessarily that complex. But the idea that you have to try and manage threats. The urban fabric can be a really sort of hostile place for a lot of biodiversity. So how do we make it less hostile through careful design? How do we create ecological connectivity through, connected vegetated pathways? How do we bring people on the journey by creating opportunities for really positive interactions with nature? How do we generate the resources that biodiversity needs? This is really, the critical part of it. Water, plants, nesting opportunities, and then facilitating processes like pollination. So they're the principles. They've been adopted in other jurisdictions. Adelaide has actually legislated for this now. ACT has really cool urban design guides that are used. Western Australia have developed some, and actually New South Wales are just about to release their kind of version of this. So, Victoria is sort of on the back foot when it comes to actually delivering these kinds of concepts. We've delivered biodiversity sensitive urban design from single home designs to schools. Schools are an extraordinary opportunity in my opinion. Urban creek restoration, commercial streetscapes, greenfield developments, inner city developments, and then we worked a bit on the Fisherman's Bend project as well. I want to tell you about two examples just to talk you through what is required and what it looks like. Oh, but quickly first, this is a bit of a indulgence, but we were invited by the National Gallery to put together a sort of exhibition about what it would look like if you designed a single house to really embrace biodiversity. And I'd encourage you to go to this website. It's got some really cool and enchanting ideas about things that anyone could do in their house to actually bring back and care for biodiversity. But moving to a more practical case study, we've been working with the Nightingale developer in a new project in Coburg called Shepherd Street project. And it's an old factory site with very little biodiversity on it. And it's high density. It's all 100% affordable, 10% social housing. Now it's already carbon neutral and with some really cool kind of water sensitive urban design features. And they came to us and said, listen, our next challenge is how we bring biodiversity into these developments. Can you do it? We really want to see tell us, imagine all the ways that biodiversity could thrive in this extremely high density environment where there are lots of threats, lots of people, minimal space to actually have biodiversity. What's possible? Can we do something cool here? And we said, yes, absolutely we can. So the first step of doing biodiversity sensitive urban design is to document your values. And typically what that means for a consultant is that they go and do a survey of what's there and say, oh, you've got a couple of biodiversity problems here. You've got to avoid this and that. But what we do is think about the past, the present, and the potential of a site. So what used to be on that site? What could be on that site, as well as just what's on that site? So, in the case of this Shepherd Street development, this is what it used to look like. It probably had beautiful river red gums, kangaroo grass, delightful kind of creeping shrubs and herbs. And so that's what we would love to be able to reflect. We're never going to be able to recreate this ecosystem in that urban fabric, but we want to reflect it and bring elements back of that ecosystem. You can use free products like this Atlas of Living Australia to explore what are the animals and plants that used to or recently have actually crossed over or are potentially nearby that you could actually draw back into that site. And actually, there are a lot of them because you've got the Merry Creek nearby. Then once you know what your values are, you can think about your objectives. So we work with all of the stakeholders, traditional custodians, the water engineers, the friends of groups, nearby residents, the council, anyone who has a stake in this, to try and generate a list of ideas of what would it look and feel like on this site if you were actually successful at delivering biodiversity sensitive urban design. And, probably quite similar to John's vision of a great city. It's a place that it honours Indigenous culture. It has 7 seasons. It's known for its diverse ecosystem. It's known for its senses. It's healthy. It's comfortable and beautiful in any weather. And these were the ideas that people really drew out. And through designing for a set of species that we then sort of suggest, you can actually achieve so many of those goals. And it might be that you choose species of conservation value, species that have cultural significance, but things that are certainly feasible and might even have economic utility. Like this bat in the bottom left corner there, which, perhaps some people fear bats, but this bat every night will eat 1,200 mosquitoes. So that it actually has value to people in being there. I mean, fairy wrens, just extraordinary and sweet animals to have that really enchant your existence. Blue-banded bees that pollinate your tomatoes and capsicums. So a selection of species that, yes, they're just one set of species, but if we design for these, so many more species will actually be protected and have habitat as well. So the next part is designing for those species. How do we provide the resources, mitigate the threats, provide the connectivity, and think about how people can engage with them? So in terms of resources, it might just be about thinking more creatively about the types of plants that you have in your streetscape. I look out my window here I'm in North Fitzroy, and we have plane trees. And again, they're sort of like a biological desert. There's no mid-story, there's no understory. And when you start reintroducing that complexity of mid-story and understory, that's when you get the birds and the insects. So it's about thinking more creatively about what you can put in your streetscapes, or it might be about rocks and logs, for example. It might be about habitat analogues like this bird waterer that is in many parks in Perth. And they're a real tourist attraction because birds flock to them. They're completely enchanting things to have in a housing estate. This is an idea that we've had that we're trying to introduce into Shepherd Street, which is a habitat pole. We don't have a lot of old trees in cities, but we've got a heck of a lot of poles. Can we use poles to actually attach habitat and actually provide resources like food, nesting boxes, etc., for animals on our poles? Mitigating threats. It might be thinking through lighting. We know that lights can be really detrimental to many urban fauna species, but we know how to fix it through thinking through the intensity of the lighting, the spectrum of the lighting, and the directionality of the lighting. We can really mitigate that effect. Glass. No one loves to hear the sound of a bird thunking on your glass. It's actually terrible and traumatic. But did you know that if you tilt glass just a bit downwards, birds see the ground and not the sky and they don't fly into it? Or you can go to BirdLife Australia's website and get these sticky things that you stick on your windows, and we can't even see them, but birds can, and they don't fly into them. There are ways, and some of them super cheap, that we can design to really eliminate many of these threats. Of course, cats are a really big problem in cities, and Shepherd Street is going to be a cat indoors development. And if people want to have cats outside, there'll be the option of having this catio, it's called, a cat patio, added to your development to allow them to be free to explore the outdoors, but not to prey on wildlife. And then connectivity. So this particular site, we were lucky, some Melbourne University colleagues had already sort of looked at how animals are moving around this Marybeck Council. And so we could use that to try and understand how this site could be connected through to the creek and to other parks to provide, so it could be a real stepping stone for biodiversity. Of course, it's not just the vegetation. You might also have to think about road design or, underpasses. Down here, you've got next to the koala there, you've got this is a frog underpass. You have to design this quite carefully so that frogs don't like to enter a space where they can't see the other side. So it needs to be dark, but not too dark. A little bit moist, but not too wet. You need to funnel them in so they don't hop onto the road. But you have to think like a frog. If you can do that, you can design these things. They really work. I was surprised. A lot of these underpasses and overpasses seemed a bit sort of hokey to me, but actually, weirdly, they really work if you can put them in place in urban settings. And then really importantly, thinking through the actions that you're going to undertake to make sure people engage with this. We're trying to put little cameras into those nesting boxes on the poles so that people can see what goes into them, what's nesting in them. Gardens for Wildlife programs, beautiful signage, engaging people in citizen science and the Great Aussie Bird Count and all sorts of other activities. iNaturalist. You can have there are things called these photo points where people can take a photo of a certain place every day and record what biodiversity is in that space. I've only got I don't have very long, but I just wanted to tell you that this is also applicable in the urban fringe, and we've been working with many different developers, including Development Victoria and Yarra Valley Water and Hazelwind, to think about how public spaces could look quite differently if you designed with biodiversity sensitive urban design in mind. I'm not going to take you through all the steps, but just to show you some images of the renders that we've come up with for biodiverse streetscapes, for biodiverse community parks, and linear active transport corridors. And this is stuff that is actually going to be designed and built for in the coming future, in the coming months. Just to conclude, we also did a costing exercise to work out what that will cost. And really interestingly, a bunch of engineers, consultants, and designers estimated the cost of different types of approaches to biodiversity sensitive urban design, from nature play areas to putting mid-story vegetation in. And 80% of the actions that we evaluated were the same cost or only a tiny bit more than business as usual. A few things were a lot more because we're not currently doing them, things like the bird watering points. And some were prohibitively more, so things like the road overpasses or underpasses. But they are available for innovative developers who really want to implement them. So I'm just going to conclude now to say that I've been lucky enough to get an ARC laureate industry fellowship to work on this topic of biodiversity sensitive urban design for the next 5 years. And I'm really excited to work with some innovative developers, some really sort of, I think, forward-thinking government agencies, and some certifiers to test, refine, and kind of try and mainstream this approach. And I think it's a real opportunity in Victoria. As John pointed out, people want this stuff. And I know there's a lot of anxiety about the growth of our city. I do feel passionately that this is one approach to urban design that people will actually love, and it's a really possible to implement, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, and I think it's really key to the livability and the acceptance of growth in our city. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll stop sharing my slides now.
So, Janet, over to you.
Sorry, I've reappeared. Well, now we can go to Q&A. And I'm never quite sure the difference between these, but we're going to ask you to write your questions in. So you can do it in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A, but you can also put things into the chat. So do you have any questions to start people off? Perhaps, Tony, you might have something you might like to start things off.
Thanks, Janet. Yes, I guess, well, I mean, my position in all this is that I chair and president of the Urban Affairs Policy Committee, and we've just gone through a policy cycle. And in August, we put our policy recommendations to state conference, and they were all accepted. And I guess to go to this question that's here is about, what are the challenges for improving the operation of the Planning and Environment Act? And I might just point out that one of our key recommendations, it's actually number 5, is that there be a thorough rewrite of the 1987 Planning and Environment Act. And what we've recommended is that, and would love to see go into the platform, that we have a principles-based piece of legislation. And I guess we point to the example of the Climate Change Act in Victoria as an excellent piece of legislation that is based upon principles. A very new piece of legislation that has set a terrific framework for policy making down at all levels. And what we'd like to see is a similar piece of legislation for the Planning and Environment Act. And it would have, in doing so, it would involve all the stakeholders in that process, that you'd actually propose and test frameworks that could be built into that legislation and link it to other pieces of legislation, such as the Climate Change Act, transport legislation, housing and planning regulation, and the like. So that, I think, is the bedrock, is that we have a revised Planning and Environment Act, and it'll be based on a very clear set of principles that recognise that we're in a very different era, I think, as John was pointing out, than we had in 1987 when it was last rewritten. So that would be my take home, and then we can begin to think about where biodiversity fits into that process. And we've got a set of recommendations there as well.
So, Tony and John, given the vision that Sarah has kind of so eloquently articulated and shown with the slides, it's quite different from what has been delivered over the past decades by the Planning and Environment Act. Given we've got this ambitious program that's in plan for Victoria to create these activity centres and to densify suburbs which have not seen densification at all, really, over years, not much, compared with the outer suburbs. What is it seems to me there's a real challenge to the strategic planning that needs to take place. So what's the role of the state government and of local government in actually being able to deliver the kind of vision that Sarah has articulated?
I'll suggest a couple of things really quickly, and then one is the first thing to recognise is we've got continuing urban growth. Australia's whole, in a sense, political economy and society rests upon continuing limited natural population growth and immigration. And so we've got this continuing growth, and we have to think about how we're going to do it differently. And now we've got most state governments saying we can't continue to expand at the fringe, which is where we currently place about 70% of our new housing. So we're moving into the sort of grasslands that Sarah was talking about, and our food bowl. And so we have to slow that process down, and there's a densification process. And it's about how you do densification well. And in fact, the objectives are to flip the 70% that we're doing on the outer suburbs to 70% in the existing inner and middle ring suburbs for growth, and only 30% on the fringe. That's the public policy objectives, and here in Victoria, but in some of the other states as well. And so it's a matter of doing that density well. And biodiversity is absolutely, crucial here. And we've got, in our policy recommendations that that urban biodiversity is embedded in the way in which the planning system works. And I guess I'd just point to one important thing is that we manage that transition exceptionally well by thinking about the fact that we've got an old patterns of subdivision, and that we have to think very carefully about how we manage the land upon which housing and the open spaces with all its urban biodiversity goes together. And it's not something that can be done just by private sector development and planning applications alone. There needs to be government guiding that redesign of the urban environment. I'll stop there.
John, do you have any comment?
Yeah. Well, first thing I'd say is that getting support for your policy objective of weaving nature into urban design is a good start. If you look at the Planning Environment Act, it already has clear objectives to protect biodiversity. And to be honest, I'm not convinced a rewrite of the Act is going to change what happens on the ground. I think we have to start by this notion of actually weaving nature and getting the benefits of nature in new developments. So it's not just a protection focus, it's about what we can actually do to achieve nature. And that's where I think it leads on to Sarah's points about biodiversity sensitive urban design, where that's a solution orientated approach.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying, let's stop things and let's, have prohibitions, it's saying, let's design things in a way that gets multiple benefits. Now, the challenge for that is that most of the people who are going to be doing the developments don't know what to do. And most of them probably won't care all that much. Sarah's working for, say, Nightingale, who want to be best in class. And really the challenge is, how do we move that approach to be much more embedded across the mainstream? I think a starting point would be in the precinct structure plans, which are done in the fringe areas, particularly because despite what you say, Tony, about wanting to move away from that, it's not going to happen at anything like the level that you want. Like the reality is most of the development still is going to be in those areas. And so the precinct structure plans that are done are critical, and that's what is done to tell the developers how to do their subdivisions. And I think what Sarah's really shown us tonight is that we can encourage the developers with blueprints and draft plans on what they can do. I think a critical thing is that we have a system for doing this where you don't have to employ Sarah or an expert for every development, because it's not going to happen. And I think we need to have a bit like we've done in water sensitive urban design, where we've now got, lots of blueprints you can just hand to developers for rain gardens and wetlands. And we need that now for biodiversity. And one thing I think is going to increasingly be able to be used is artificial intelligence, that we can, with artificial intelligence, provide a lot of that knowledge in a much cheaper and quicker way than we've had in the past. And so I think we should be really incorporating it and making it as easy as possible for developers to do the sort of thing Sarah has been talking about tonight.
Now, Philip Robinson asked a question, which is actually saying this, asking this very thing. So I think you've actually answered his question. That how do we actually get this included in the new housing the Victorian government is wanting to ramp up? So I think you've covered that. But have you got thoughts about? I mean, you've got a lot of people sitting watching this, thinking, "What can I do?" And so, any ideas about what we all can do?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I've got plenty of ideas.
Plenty of ideas, far away.
I mean, I feel like there's stuff you can do just in your own house or your own apartment, whether you're renting or you own it. There's so much that you can do. So from thinking about your windows and how to make them bird friendly, thinking about your front garden, your back garden, if you're lucky enough to have them, or your balcony if you've got one, and what plants you sort of put on them to encourage biodiversity. Thinking about water, water is a really sort of restricted resource for a lot of biodiversity in cities, and you need different types of water. So yeah, birds need bird baths, but butterflies get stuck in bird baths. I don't know if you've ever seen a butterfly drinking, but they do it on the edges of creeks in the gravel. And that's what you need to kind of mimic. Well, we've got air conditioners that drip. Put some gravel and rocks around your dripping air conditioners, and you will see so many insects going to that in the summer months to drink, because it's exactly the type of water and it's safe for them to drink. Thinking about your cats and making sure that they're kept inside or that they're in catios, that's absolutely critical, and it's better for the health of your cat as well. Every outdoor roaming cat eats about 186 native animals per year. That's a pretty well evidenced study. So, I mean, gosh, I could keep going on and on, but
Sarah,
I think the other thing that we've
can I ask you a question, Sarah? What about nature strips?
yes.
What about nature strips?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I think this is we've got to push our councils to allow us to be doing this kind of stuff, beyond our boundaries of our own properties, and making sure that it's not costly or kind of prohibited. So yeah, nature strip guidelines that are really encourage people to be doing this stuff in their streetscapes, absolutely. But I also just think that the current government does not get that biodiversity is something that people care about. And this is my number one take-home message. We've seen our Department of Environment gutted when it comes to biodiversity. We've seen investment in biodiversity absolutely plummet. And I don't think most Victorians get it or understand it, but not many people are actually reacting and demanding change, even though we know that people really care. So, that's the number one thing you have to do, is actually start getting a better investment for biodiversity and elevating it, I suppose, in the public debate, so that it's not just something that can be, put at the bottom of the barrel and forgotten about.
But I make a suggestion. I mean, one of Joan Kerner's, perhaps her greatest thing she did was land care. Do we need a city care? Now, we have peak groups who do the creeks. So we've got the Mary Creek and the Many Ponds Creek groups. But is there a place for community voluntary organisation to be getting people to think about their neighbourhood and working on it together?
Well, as you say, there is a lot of that already. I mean, there are amazing groups. Melbourne Water, we used to support heaps of them. And yes, they will have a bit of a focus on waterways, but greening the West, all around Melbourne, there are people really active in this way. Thinking of Sarah's initial response there, the Biodiversity Council has put out a lot of stuff on cats, and I think it's making a difference. I think that in the last 12 months, the discussion on cats has changed. And I think a lot of that is because of the stuff that Biodiversity Council put out. But what you were saying before about butterflies, like I hadn't even heard, I didn't know that. And I think if we had a sort of a simple, and maybe the Biodiversity Council's already done it, but some sort of simple sheet on those things that we could even share amongst all Labor members just in their own houses, I think that will start to raise people's knowledge. Because one thing that's come out of these surveys we do is that people care a lot about biodiversity, but they actually don't know much about the threats to it. And a lot of people think it's a lot healthier than it really is. And Sarah talked about the ornamental pear trees. Most people will look at that and just see a tree. They won't see a biodiversity desert. And so increasing people's understanding, I think, is always important, increasing our literacy. And, through the Labor Party and Labor Academy, if Biodiversity Council put out something on the 5 things you can do around your home, I think that's a start. Because I also know from the work we do in Behaviourworks, which Sarah's an expert in as well, that if people start to do something about sustainability or nature, there's often a spillover into their other things that they do and indeed their political attitudes. So it's an easier way often to get political change rather than just hit people over the head with something, is to actually get them doing some behaviour which is sensitive to biodiversity or the environment, and then they'll more likely to advocate for it.
So John, what then is, come back to my question, what is the role of the state government and therefore Labor as it goes to the next election to try to encourage this, to encourage everything that you're saying? I mean, I'm struck by the fact that today, last day or so, we've had the government announce its changes to the Planning and Environment Act, which are all about streamlining approval processes for densification. And I bet, I have not across the details, but I bet there's nothing in there about BSUD. All right. And so I would have thought if we want to encourage this kind of thing, there should be something about BSUD. In other words, if you want to get a streamlined planning approval process, not only must your building fit within a certain size envelope and have a certain energy rating and so on, but you've also got to create some gain in biodiversity. Isn't that something that the government should be taking on?
Well, that's why I think you're taking the right approach, which is to get a general support for the principle of weaving nature into it. You're not going to be able to take the government on head on now and say, slow down, don't do a more medium density development. Like,
no, I'm actually saying if you want to achieve your time frame, and do it with social license, without objections to other people trying to slow you down, then incorporate biodiversity, incorporate the weaving, and put that into the instruments, put that into the way you assemble parcels of land. I mean, it struck me and Tony that, this whole idea of these activity centres where populations are basically going to double in existing suburbs, And you start thinking, well, where am I going to double the area of open space so that I maintain the open space provision per capita in an existing suburb? I've actually got to acquire land that's already built on to do that. Who's going to do that?
Well, I think a lot of it, I'd put more focus on the quality of the open space too, and uh, both from a human point of view and from a biodiversity point of view. And I think that what Sarah's shown us today is that by using smart biodiversity sensitive design, you can get higher quality spaces. And
Yep. Yep.
this is what we've got to really do. We do have some challenges we've got to recognize. One is that if you look at the sort of developments that Sarah had, they are quite large footprints. Like you've got to agglomerate sites. And our big challenge in the middle suburbs and the inner suburbs is we've got small sites. And so that slide she showed of the place that didn't have much trees, the problem is they're pretty small sites. It's a lot better if you've got a bigger site and you can have some of your medium or even medium to high density and a good nature space. And so I do think this has to go hand in hand with a strategy to agglomerate sites to wherever you can. The site in Coburg is a good one because it's a big site. I mean, it was a former factory or something. And that's why I say I wouldn't rule out the fringe suburbs, because you do have greenfield sites and actually you could do this sort of thing sometimes more easily on those greenfield sites. And that's why I think embedding this in precinct structure planning is really important, so that that becomes the off-the-shelf design that developers do in these places.
You're almost arguing, it seems to me, for kind of a precinct structure planning process for these activity centres or these densification areas.
Well, they have that. I mean, they do have that now, but I don't think biodiversity's been a big part in it. And I think what we're saying is that it can be a greater part of it.
Tony, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree that a precinct structure planning for existing urban areas is the way to go, but you do need in that process to manage the land consolidation process. I think that land consolidation will produce much better results because we can then design our corridors, as we've talked about in terms of urban biodiversity. We can then design in sufficient open space, in additional open space for recreation and the like. So the question is, how do we go from a existing subdivision plan that's up for redevelopment and consolidate those sites so that we can get good urban design with good biodiversity design as a part of it.
And let's learn what they're doing in other places. So Sarah highlighted South Australia. Sarah, are there things from there that we could learn from?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So, this is I think it may be a bit of an accident in some respects, but biodiversity sensitive urban design ended up being legislated for. And, I think everyone's been scrambling to kind of understand really what that meant in terms of, what developers are required to do. But what it's seen though is an absolute explosion of innovation. And, people from designing new hospitals to, thinking about, a single house development have been encouraged to think, outside of the box in terms of delivering for biodiversity. And, you see local councils actually coming up with strategic species that they want everyone to be planning for. We don't have that in Melbourne. There are no species targets for Melbourne or for any local council in Victoria. And so, if that coordinated thinking of we're all going to be designing now for the common brown butterfly, for example, that means, and it can mean actually just putting a lemon tree on your balcony. They love lemon trees. But, if people knew that and knew what it meant in terms of their actions, even in existing homes, I think it would be a really powerful thing. So it's coordinated action and innovation, and that's really what we need. And to be honest with you, having some regulatory sort of driver like they've got in South Australia has been the world of difference. It's why the innovation is happening. It's not perfect, but it's a really inspiring kind of pathway of what we could achieve.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a good start, Nick, for Lean to look at what they're doing and see whether we can replicate it.
Well, we kind of have. In essence, John, what our campaign has done is really said, look, its focus has been to say, look, the Planning and Environment Act, for whatever reasons, has not actually been delivering the outcomes that we need, and therefore it's an obvious candidate to pick on to get, if you like, the E in the name of the Act actually meaning something in the modern era. I think the lesson from the South Australian legislation is that it shows that there is a role for this kind of thing to become legislated. Now, whether the Planning and Environment Act is the right or the best place for that in Victoria, perhaps is an open question. The situation that we've got right now is that we've got some specific policy recommendations that got up at conference, and therefore there's an opportunity to get a commitment into the platform next year to go down this BSUD road. And I think that linking the commitment to going down the BSUD road in Victoria would be very good electorally. I think that it would also set the scene, enable us to sort of actually describe a way of achieving the aspirations and the goals that are in the Plan for Victoria in a more streamlined way, which doesn't make us hostage to the kind of political and local community NIMBYism that we are going to see. One of the fears that I've got is that we've kind of set ourselves up as a bit of a hostage to the naysayers, politically and at a community level, and that we need to actually seize the moment and actually get on the front foot with it.
I think you need probably a social media campaign with lots of very good little reels with Sarah giving people tips about how the world can be remade. And there are people with the skills to do that, but I think both Labor and Lean have got to get a bit edgier in the way that they're trying to reach out to people and do that. Now, we've got a question from Janet Belitho. Kerry, do you want to take that forward for us? And
you can do that one. I was going to raise another question, which is further down in the Q&A.
All right.
So if you want to do that.
All right. So I haven't missed. Sorry, I haven't been scrolling down. Oh, there's lots of questions. All right. Well, look, we better sort of focus on those. So Janet Belitho wants to know from Sarah, from your slide of the Atlas of Living Australia, it showed the biodiversity along the creek. How does your thinking about BSUD incorporate our urban waterways and emphasising the health and wellbeing benefits for future residents?
I mean, I think waterways are actually incredibly critical. Like, we all knew during COVID that that's where we congregated. That's where we got our mental well-being breaks, is from being, often, if we were lucky enough, to be by our rivers, and they were so well utilized and probably continue to be so. So yeah, I feel like waterways are a really great kind of community connector. People understand, the connectivity along a creek, but then you look up from the creek and you see people's backyards, and they've got agapanthus and yuccas and things that are, and ornamental pears. So, we've actually got to make people feel like they're part of the solution to that creek, being, creating fingers into the urban fabric, and their backyard is and their streetscape and their schoolyard and even their sports ground, like all these places, people don't think of as being places for biodiversity, but they truly can be if they're designed in the right way. So I feel like that's probably the role of biodiversity sensitive urban design is, yes, thinking about creek restoration and having objectives for creeks and making sure that our creeks are healthy as they possibly can be, but also how do our waterways create that sort of network into the urban fabric so that we can all enjoy the benefits of nature every day.
And can I just jump in on one issue here, which is a hobby horse of mine, which is permeability. Um, in terms of damage to our creeks, one of the key reasons is that all of our pavements and roadways are solid surfaces, which means all the stormwater runs straight off. And you can, through good water sensitive and biosensitive urban design, have permeable pavement, permeable streets. You can use recycled tires and all sorts of materials to do that. And we need to embed this not just in our planning scheme, but in our road making and in our council activities as well. And so I don't think we should think this is all just a planning issue. This is really all the infrastructure that we build needs to be infrastructure which takes into account biodiversity and nature, the landscape.
Yep.
I've got a couple of questions that are in the Q&A. One attendee has said that they're a landscape architect and they can confirm that developers approach biodiversity as tokenistic at best. And they're really wanting to know what policy change is needed to require developers to take this seriously.
Well, I think Sarah answered that. Here, go on, Sarah.
I mean, I was going to just give an anecdote of I was invited to give a talk at the ESG summit of Stockland last week. And, you know, they've actually, interestingly, adopted biodiversity sensitive urban design as a frame, as a policy that they want to try and implement in their projects. But, you know, they are still growing into areas with threatened species and threatened habitats. And, you know, the one thing that they said to me was that they really wish, and I don't think they'd actually say this in public, but they really wish there were stronger laws around protecting nature, and so that all developers were on an equal playing field when it came to that notion, so that they didn't have to stick their heads, you know, way above what's required to actually do the right thing. That it was just that was the kind of even playing field. And so, yeah, I feel like actually sort of saying that we don't want to have development actually impinging on our threatened species and threatened habitats anymore, that we really want to seek other ways of doing urban development, and they're entirely possible. We know there's been so much modelling done about this. I mean, Infrastructure Victoria showed that consolidation as an approach in Melbourne would save us, I can't remember what the figure was, but it was something like, you know, $40 billion between now and 2050, because we wouldn't have the cost of the extra infrastructure of urban expansion. So it's a, you know, it makes sense to think about consolidation. But doing it in a way that there was an even playing field, so that developers, you know, knew that was the rule. We don't clear threatened species habitat. We don't destroy threatened species. You know, that's step one, and then they can innovate without sort of feeling like they're actually, you know, going to be costed out of the game.
Tony, would you like to comment on something that's come up in conversation at the UAPC, which is that there are developers and there are developers. So there are developers who specialise in the greenfields projects, the projects at the outer edge, and who create a design that accords with the precinct structure plan, and they create the subdivision, and then they sell the lots for people to build. There are others who play the game in existing suburbs, to the redevelopment game, and I think that it's going to be a challenge, I think, to get the kind of attitude, Sarah, that you've described in Stockland to apply to those that are actually playing the game in the inner suburbs. Would you like to comment, Tony, on that?
Yeah, I think the main thing to remember is that we have developers, and we often talk just about the big ones. You know, we talk about the Lendleases and the Stocklands and the like. But there's a mass of small developers as well. They don't have an office. They don't know anything about biodiversity. They don't have people that work on these topics. The people the big companies are the ones that have a back room and can think about innovation. And this is where Stockland is really saying, can we in this environment, achieve biodiversity objectives? The best way to do this is to go through the legislative arrangements, whether it's a new Planning and Environment Act or not is another matter, but have a legislative framework with the regulations that come from it that say, if you're going to redevelop this area, you must contribute to meeting regulated biodiversity targets, whether it's to do with flora and fauna and all its diversity. Then you have to contribute to meeting these objectives. We actually need. I mean, we talk in here about having a legislative framework for urban biodiversity with a model that then requires and mandates that there be a biodiversity planning and implementation response.
Yeah. I mean, we already have certain rules about, there must be one tree outside a development. But that's kind of that's what we've got at the moment.
That's the minimum.
That is, and it's usually a freaking ornamental pear. But anyway,
can we agree on one thing, that the ornamental pear will be removed from the regulatory process from tonight? So Nick, if you can get that, you will have achieved something.
Do possums like ornamental pears?
No,
they like all my fruit trees.
I mean, the other thing I would add to this discussion is that there is a limited knowledge out there about biodiversity, and I just put a plug in for saying that our universities and our TAFE colleges could be supported to really further develop and embed biodiversity knowledge and learning that the professionals, the landscape architects, the architects, the planners, the water engineers, all of these, all our universities are producing these people. We then have horticulture within our TAFE system. Let's have some further curriculum development and skilling up of the people who can lead these processes and have work integrated learning, all the rest of it that goes with the university and TAFE education to get new graduates familiar with this enormous task of increasing the urban biodiversity of our cities.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're at 8:33, so we've been going for an hour and a half. I think probably it's time for everyone to have a cup of tea. So, if I may thank, first of all, Nick and Tony for putting this together, for requesting it and conceiving of it and inviting the speakers, and then especially Sarah and John, who've given us a wonderful evening, which has stimulated so much thought and given us so much knowledge. And to those who are listening and watching, this will be, it's being recorded and it will be edited in a film and on the Labour Academy website within a couple of days. And then we'll probably see whether there are some short films we can also make that. So may I thank you, and I'm sure that silently out there in the Zoomiverse, everybody is joining me enthusiastically to applaud and thank you for an absolutely splendid presentation. Thank you all.
And can I just add my thanks to John, to Sarah, to Tony, and also to you, Janet, for organising this. And then sitting in our kind of room, looking at the questions, Kerry and Ian. And then to everybody who came along, I'd encourage you to have conversations within your branches with your MPs, because it really is important that this topic gets picked up and discussed. We're trying as best we can to get some kind of commitment for what the things we've been talking about into the platform. So if anything you can do to encourage discussion within the party to build support for BSUD being part of the system would be absolutely terrific. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Enjoy your cup of tea or cup of coffee.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you.